Are you sure that's what you meant to say? Jasmine Carter's voice cut through the conference hall like a sharp note from a piano, making even the hum of the overhead projectors falter for a heartbeat. She stood at the back, clutching her leather-bound notebook, her fingers tracing the edge as if it anchored her courage. The air was thick with anticipation, the smell of polished wood and freshly brewed coffee mingling under the bright stage lights. Hundreds of eyes turned toward her, some in curiosity, others in mild annoyance, as Richard Whitman, the Billionaire CEO, leaned into the microphone, scanning the room with that signature measured calm that made his presence feel almost tangible. Jasmine's gaze didn't waver. She had noticed a subtle misstep in his speech, a phrase that could be misconstrued, a statistic slightly off that might ripple into a larger misunderstanding in the press release. Her mind raced with every detail she had studied, every lesson her father, a seasoned attorney, had imparted about precision and accountability. Her heart thumped in rhythm with the murmurs and shuffling feet around her, yet she exhaled slowly, steadying herself against the tide of tension. Richard adjusted his cufflinks, the silver catching the light, and began to speak again, his deep voice rolling across the polished floors, smooth and confident. He didn't expect her to challenge him, certainly not with such clarity. Jasmine raised her hand slightly, a gesture almost imperceptible yet full of intent, and repeated her question, more firmly this time, making sure the words carried just enough weight to be heard without breaking decorum. The room seemed to hold its breath. Even the assistants standing near the podium paused mid-note, pencils hovering above notepads. The slight rustle of papers, the soft tick of a wall clock, and the distant hum of air conditioning amplified the gravity of the moment. Richard's eyes flicked toward her, narrowing, a flicker of surprise crossing his composed expression, but he maintained his posture, a statue of authority framed against the soft glow of the overhead lights. Jasmine's voice remained calm, her words precise, echoing the knowledge she had accumulated in quiet hours, poring over contracts and corporate reports, honing a keen understanding that belied her 17 years. The audience, caught between respect and disbelief, leaned forward imperceptibly, sensing that something unexpected was unfolding. For a moment, the usual rhythm of the hall, the polite applause, the murmured affirmations, was suspended. Only Jasmine's voice and the weight of the truth she conveyed filled the space, creating a tension so sharp it felt almost tactile, like the charged air before a summer storm. She continued, her eyes locking with Richard's for a fraction of a second that stretched impossibly long, conveying not just correction but the quiet authority of someone who knew the stakes. In that pause, with the room's collective attention fixed on them, the billionaire shifted slightly, the careful armor of his confidence momentarily yielding to the realization that the words he had prepared might not convey exactly what he intended. The hum of the projectors resumed, softer now, as if acknowledging the shift, and somewhere in the back, a faint cough underscored the delicate balance of power beginning to tilt. The room remained suspended in a hush that felt almost tangible, the soft whir of the air conditioning blending with the subtle creak of polished floorboards beneath chairs as attendees shifted slightly, their eyes fixed on Jasmine Carter as she maintained her posture, shoulders squared, and gaze unwavering. Richard Whitman, momentarily caught off balance, blinked rapidly, his deep breath audible, yet he did not move from the podium, his presence still commanding, though slightly altered by the unexpected intervention. Jasmine could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes on her, the faint prickle of heat rising to her cheeks, yet she allowed it to pass without acknowledgment, concentrating instead on the words she had prepared in the quiet hours before the presentation. The slight click of a projector, the soft rustle of a notebook page turned, punctuated the silence as she continued, carefully clarifying the intended meaning behind a statistic, her tone firm but respectful, measured with precision that spoke to both understanding and poise. She watched Richard's eyes narrow slightly, observing the way his fingers tapped the edge of the podium, a subtle display of focus and recalibration as he absorbed the correction. The audience's collective breath seemed to synchronize with the unfolding moment, the room itself holding a delicate tension, like the calm before a tidal wave of realization. Jasmine's words, calm and deliberate, carried not only the content of correction, but the quiet authority of someone who knew the implications of misstatements, someone whose diligence and preparation lent weight beyond her years. Richard shifted his stance, the light from the overhead fixtures glinting off the polished surfaces of the podium and his silver cufflinks, emphasizing the contrast between his established authority and the unexpected insight coming from the back of the room. A few subtle nods from advisors and colleagues hinted at acknowledgment, yet the room remained hushed, the ambient noises muted as if the space itself were bending to the clarity of the correction. Jasmine's breathing was steady, her heartbeat a quiet metronome beneath the poised exterior, and she allowed the words to resonate fully, letting the significance of the correction be absorbed before she added a final emphasis on a particularly critical point. Richard's expression softened imperceptibly, a flicker of awareness crossing the stoic mask he typically wore, and for a moment, time seemed to stretch in the hall, each second weighed with anticipation, comprehension, and a growing sense of respect that even the most casual observer could feel radiating from the interaction. The faint echo of her words lingered in the high-ceilinged room as she lowered her hand slowly, maintaining eye contact for the briefest moment with Richard, allowing the silence to communicate more than any spoken acknowledgment could, and as she stepped back slightly, the tension began to shift, the room subtly realigning around the new understanding that had quietly taken root, an unspoken acknowledgment of accuracy, diligence, and integrity standing firm even against the weight of corporate authority. Jasmine stepped forward, her polished black shoes making almost no sound against the gleaming hardwood floor, the spotlight catching the edge of her notebook and the subtle shimmer of her dark hair pulled neatly behind her ears. She felt the slight weight of every gaze in the room, hundreds of pairs of eyes measuring, judging, and some even doubting, yet she allowed the gravity to steady her rather than shake her resolve. Richard Whitman stood at the podium, the microphone capturing the low hum of his inhalations, and for the first time that morning, his posture wavered slightly, shoulders relaxing and then tensing, a silent acknowledgement that the information she was offering carried weight beyond her years. The projected slide behind him flickered faintly, casting shifting shadows across the rows of suited executives, and the soft whirring of the ceiling fan seemed louder, emphasizing the stillness that now ruled the space. Jasmine adjusted the angle of her notebook, the paper crisp under her fingers, and with a deep, controlled breath, she continued to articulate the correction, her words crisp, deliberate, and imbued with a quiet authority that demanded attention without raising her voice. The murmurs of colleagues, which had been almost imperceptible, fell entirely silent, replaced by the collective focus on her explanation, the subtle emphasis of facts delivered with clarity. Richard's gaze shifted from the notes he had prepared to Jasmine, then back to the podium, his mind racing to reconcile the precision of her observation with the confidence he had projected just moments before. The room's ambient sounds, the soft shuffle of papers, the distant tapping of a pen, the gentle click of a projector advancing slides, formed a delicate soundtrack to the unfolding realization that the CEO had been caught in a subtle oversight. Jasmine's breathing remained steady, each exhale a quiet assertion of her presence, a reinforcement of the fact that knowledge and attention to detail could command attention even in a space dominated by power. The air seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next movement, the next word, as the executives leaned forward, physically and mentally, sensing the significance of the moment. A faint shimmer of light caught in the corners of Richard's eyes, reflecting the subtle acknowledgement of the accuracy that Jasmine had presented, and as she gently lowered her hand, maintaining her posture, the collective weight of the room seemed to pivot imperceptibly, a silent shift in authority measured not by title, but by insight and courage. The soft tapping of a distant keyboard sounded like a heartbeat in the quiet, the reflective surfaces of the polished floors and tables echoing the subtle energy change in the space. Jasmine allowed herself a slight, imperceptible nod, a private acknowledgement of the correctness of her observation, while Richard's fingers drummed lightly against the podium, the rhythm betraying a mix of contemplation and surprise, a silent concession to the unexpected reversal that had quietly unfolded in the room. Every element, the light, the sound, the faint shifting of chairs, the subtle movements of hands, the hushed inhalations of those gathered, conspired to mark a moment of transformation, where awareness and integrity quietly reshaped the balance of attention and respect, the scene frozen for just a heartbeat in the rhythm of the day, with Jasmine standing poised, calm, and resolute. The embodiment of quiet competence meeting high stakes in the corporate theater. The room's atmosphere shifted. Subtly as Jasmine Carter took another step forward, her dark eyes scanning the attentive faces around her, noticing the slight furrow of brows, the tiny nods, and the quick, almost imperceptible glances exchanged between colleagues who were realizing the weight of her observation. Richard Whitman's jaw tightened slightly, a brief hesitation in his normally fluid gestures, his hands resting lightly on the edge of the podium as if to anchor himself against the ripple of realization moving through the audience. The soft glow from the chandeliers overhead created a warm contrast against the cool marble floors, reflecting faint streaks of light that danced across the polished surfaces, highlighting the crisp lines of Jasmine's blouse and the subtle sheen of her notebook as she held it firmly but relaxed in her grasp. The low hum of the projector became background noise, almost like a metronome marking the rhythm of the unfolding moment, while the faint click of pens being set down by other executives punctuated the silence that had settled over the crowd. Jasmine's tone remained calm, deliberate, each word carefully chosen to clarify a key point that, if misunderstood, could have far-reaching consequences for the agreement being discussed, and yet delivered with such quiet confidence that it demanded respect without needing to raise her voice. Richard's eyes followed her movements closely, tracking the subtle emphasis she placed on certain terms, the careful modulation of her voice, the way her hands gestured naturally to illustrate a complex idea, and for the first time, he allowed himself to fully absorb not only what she was saying, but the depth of preparation and understanding behind it. Around them, the audience shifted minutely, leaning slightly forward, a collective acknowledgment that they were witnessing a moment of competence meeting authority in a way that was unexpectedly persuasive. Jasmine took a small breath, the only sound in the near-silent hall, and then proceeded to articulate the broader implications of the clarification, her voice steady and clear, resonating across the polished room, filling every corner with reasoned insight. Richard's posture remained upright, but the subtle tension in his shoulders eased as he processed the accuracy and precision of her intervention, a quiet respect beginning to form even before a word was spoken in acknowledgment. The light from the windows along the side cast a soft glow across the room, catching the reflections in the glass of the podium and highlighting the attentive expressions of those seated, each face marked by the realization that expertise and insight were not limited to titles or years of experience. Jasmine's presence remained poised, unshaken by the intensity of the moment, allowing the quiet authority of her understanding to permeate the space, her breathing calm and controlled, her gaze steady on Richard, signaling not defiance but clarity and conviction. In that stretch of time, the room existed in a delicate balance, suspended between expectation and revelation, as the clarity of her explanation reverberated silently, yet powerfully through the audience, subtly reshaping the perception of capability and influence, and marking the moment as one where measured insight could quietly command respect even against the backdrop of the grand authority represented by the podium and the man standing behind it. Jasmine Carter felt a brief surge of adrenaline as she noticed the slight hesitation in Richard Whitman's posture, a crack in the meticulously maintained confidence that usually projected effortless control over every room he entered. The soft lighting from the recessed ceiling fixtures cast subtle shadows across the faces of the audience, highlighting the attentive expressions and the slight widening of eyes as the significance of her insight began to resonate. She adjusted the angle of her notebook slightly, ensuring the pages were visible enough to support her clarification, her fingers moving with practiced precision, reflecting the careful preparation that had brought her to this moment. The low hum of the ventilation system mixed with the almost imperceptible shuffle of shoes against the polished marble floor, creating a subtle rhythm that underscored the tension in the hall. Richard's hands rested lightly on the podium, his fingers drumming a quiet cadence, betraying a rare pause in his otherwise fluid movements, as he processed the correction and considered the implications for the statements he had prepared. Jasmine continued, her voice clear and measured, each word carefully enunciated to maintain both authority and composure, emphasizing the specific details that could prevent misunderstanding in subsequent communications and ensuring that the factual precision she offered was unmistakable. The audience remained suspended in a quiet attentiveness, their collective energy a mixture of anticipation and acknowledgment, a subtle shift in perception forming as they realized the weight of her knowledge. Jasmine's posture remained firm yet relaxed, exuding confidence without aggression, a visual and auditory anchor in the midst of the room's heightened focus. The projector's soft click as the next slide advanced seemed almost ceremonial, punctuating the transition of attention fully to the insight she provided, while the chandelier above reflected light across the room, creating a luminous halo effect that highlighted the contrast between the calm assertiveness of Jasmine and the temporary disruption in Richard's previously unshakable demeanor. Every minor sound, the scratch of a pen, the faint rustle of papers, the slight inhale of a colleague, seemed magnified against the quiet authority Jasmine projected, reinforcing the palpable tension and the slow but undeniable shift in the atmosphere. She allowed a brief pause between points, letting the words settle and giving Richard and the audience a moment to process, the silence becoming a tool as effective as the facts she presented, lending additional weight to her correction. Richard's gaze flicked repeatedly between the notebook and Jasmine, registering the depth of her understanding and the thoroughness of her preparation, and a subtle exhalation escaped him, almost imperceptible, as recognition of accuracy began to replace the initial surprise. The room remained still, the previous undercurrent of anticipation transforming into quiet respect, as Jasmine's calm confidence and unwavering attention to detail created an unspoken acknowledgment of her capability, the authority of knowledge quietly asserting itself over the weight of experience and title without any need for confrontation, raising a subtle but distinct awareness of the value of preparation, integrity, and clarity in even the most high-pressure settings. Jasmine Carter's voice remained steady as she articulated the final clarification, her words precise and measured, carrying the weight of careful preparation while maintaining an air of calm authority that seemed to ripple across the room. Richard Whitman's expression shifted subtly, his eyes narrowing as he absorbed the accuracy and implications of her insight, the careful cadence of his breathing reflecting a rare pause in his normally commanding presence. The soft overhead lighting cast a warm glow over the polished podium, highlighting the subtle textures of the leather-bound notebook in Jasmine's hands and the understated confidence in her stance, while the marble floors reflected faint glimmers of the chandeliers above, lending a quiet elegance to the charged atmosphere. The audience, hundreds of executives and assistants, remained still, their attention fixed, the faint scratching of pens and gentle rustle of papers serving as the only audible counterpoint to the hushed focus that had enveloped the room. Jasmine continued to speak with measured clarity, emphasizing the critical details that could have caused confusion or misinterpretation in the prepared speech, each word delivered with deliberate intent and a calm rhythm that made it impossible to ignore. Richard's hands rested lightly on the podium, his fingers flexing ever so slightly as he weighed the significance of her observations, the subtle furrow of his brow betraying his internal calculation and growing acknowledgment of the value of her intervention. The light from the side windows shifted with the movement of the sun, catching the edge of the podium and reflecting across the attentive faces of the audience, casting soft highlights that enhanced the sense of focus and importance in the moment. Jasmine's breathing was calm, controlled, a quiet counterpoint to the intensity of the room, and her posture remained confident, shoulders squared, eyes unwavering, as she allowed the precision of her statements to resonate fully. The ambient sounds, the faint hum of the projector, the slight murmur of colleagues adjusting in their seats, the soft tick of a wall clock, formed a subtle backdrop that underscored the significance of the interaction, every element contributing to a palpable sense of gravity. Richard's gaze continued to shift between Jasmine and the notes before him, registering the depth of her understanding and the thoroughness of her preparation, and in that silent acknowledgment, a quiet respect began to emerge, bridging the usual gap between authority and observation. The room felt suspended in a moment of realization, the flow of light, sound, and presence converging to mark a subtle yet undeniable pivot in perception, where knowledge, poise, and integrity had quietly yet decisively shifted the balance, leaving Jasmine standing composed, commanding attention not through force but through clarity, insight, and unwavering confidence. Jasmine Carter held her posture, shoulders squared and gaze unwavering. As the room settled into a tense silence, the soft flicker of light from the large windows casting elongated reflections across the polished wooden floor. Richard Whitman's eyes remained fixed on her, the faint tightening of his jaw and the subtle shift in his stance betraying a rare crack in his otherwise unshakable composure, and the low hum of the ventilation system combined with the quiet shuffle of papers and whispered movements in the audience to create an almost tangible sense of anticipation. Jasmine adjusted the notebook in her hands, the pages crisp and orderly, reflecting the hours of preparation that had brought her to this exact moment. And she spoke with a calm clarity that resonated through the hall, each word precise and deliberate, emphasizing the critical importance of accuracy and comprehension without raising her voice. The soft click of a pen being set down, the gentle scrape of a chair leg on the marble floor, and the distant hum of the projector punctuated the stillness, drawing every ear toward her explanation and allowing the subtle authority of her knowledge to permeate the space. Richard's fingers drummed lightly on the podium, a quiet rhythm of thought and calculation as he absorbed the implications of her correction, the careful modulation of his gaze betraying a moment of respect forming in response to the insight she had provided. Jasmine's breathing remained steady, controlled, and deliberate, each inhale and exhale synchronized with the rhythm of her words, and her posture radiated quiet confidence, demonstrating that authority could be communicated without volume, only through presence, clarity, and precision. Around her, the audience was rapt, their eyes following the subtle gestures she made to underscore her points, the minimalistic soundscape of the room amplifying the impact of her delivery, and the interplay of light and shadow across faces and surfaces enhanced the sense of focus and attentiveness. Jasmine allowed a brief pause after emphasizing a particularly critical detail, giving space for the room to absorb the information, and in that silence, the tension shifted slightly, the balance of attention tilting subtly as recognition of her correctness spread from whispered acknowledgment to the unmistakable impression of authority earned. Richard leaned slightly forward, his hands still resting lightly on the podium, and his lips parted just enough to let out a measured breath, signaling the first conscious acknowledgment of the validity of her points, while the ambient reflections from the glass surfaces and the soft, diffused light accentuated the quiet intensity of the interaction. Every element, the subdued hum, the faint shifting of chairs, the glint of light across surfaces, and the attentive expressions of colleagues, conspired to mark a subtle but profound turning point, a moment where clarity, preparation, and quiet confidence quietly redefined the perception of influence in the room, and Jasmine stood poised, composed, and unwavering, the embodiment of calm authority meeting high-stakes expectation in a space that had been transformed by her precise, thoughtful insight. Jasmine Carter took a measured breath, allowing the subtle shift in the room's energy to settle around her as she prepared to continue, her fingers lightly resting on the edge of her notebook while her eyes scanned the attentive faces before her, noting the small nods and the faint exchange of glances among colleagues as the implications of her observation began to resonate. The afternoon light filtering through the tall windows cast a gentle glow across the polished floors, illuminating the careful arrangement of chairs, the reflections of chandeliers on the glass surfaces, and the crisp lines of Jasmine's blazer, all contributing to the heightened sense of focus and intensity. Richard Whitman's gaze remained fixed on her, the faint furrow of his brow softening as he absorbed the clarity and precision of her words, a subtle acknowledgment passing through the tension in his posture as he processed the accuracy of her correction. The soft hum of the ventilation system provided a quiet counterpoint to the near-silent room, punctuated only by the occasional click of a pen being set down or the rustle of paper as someone adjusted their notes, underscoring the anticipation and weight of the unfolding moment. Jasmine continued speaking with calm authority, articulating each point with precision and purpose, the rhythm of her voice measured and deliberate, emphasizing the importance of accuracy and understanding without overwhelming the space with volume, allowing the content itself to command attention. She gestured subtly to the notes she had prepared, the slight motion reinforcing her words and drawing the audience's focus to the specifics of the correction, while the polished surfaces of the podium and surrounding furnishings reflected light in a way that accentuated the careful balance of authority and clarity she maintained. The audience, hundreds of executives and assistants, remained enraptured, their eyes tracking her movements, their attention undivided as they absorbed the unexpected expertise and confidence of someone so young yet so precise. Richard's fingers tapped lightly against the podium, a quiet rhythm of thought and calculation as he recognized not just the correctness of her observation, but the composure and insight she brought to the situation, his stance shifting imperceptibly as a subtle respect began to form. Jasmine allowed a brief pause, letting the weight of her explanation settle across the room, the silence amplifying the significance of her points and providing space for reflection, the balance of attention subtly tilting as acknowledgment of her competence spread. Among the audience, the gentle flicker of sunlight across faces and surfaces, the quiet shifting of chairs, and the attentive expressions of the room's occupants combined to create a tableau of focus and realization, where preparation, insight, and calm authority quietly redefined the perception of influence. Jasmine's posture remained unwavering, her presence calm, yet commanding, her breathing steady as she maintained eye contact with Richard, demonstrating that clarity and integrity could resonate more powerfully than title or seniority, quietly transforming the dynamic in the room without a single raised voice. Jasmine Carter noticed a subtle shift in the atmosphere, the quiet acknowledgement from a few executives near the front of the room, their slight nods and the gentle lean forward signaling that her precision and clarity were beginning to reshape the understanding in the hall. The sunlight streaming through the tall windows along the side wall created soft patterns across the polished floors, reflecting faint highlights on the edges of the notebook in her hands and the subtle sheen of her neatly combed hair, emphasizing the contrast between her composed presence and the tension lingering in Richard Whitman's posture. The faint rustle of papers and the soft tap of a pen against a notepad punctuated the silence, a delicate underscore to the gravity of the situation, while the gentle hum of the ventilation system provided a continuous but unobtrusive backdrop. Jasmine continued, her voice measured and calm, articulating the implications of the correction with a steady cadence that carried both authority and composure, each word reinforcing her understanding of the details and the potential consequences of misstatements if left unaddressed. Richard's fingers flexed lightly on the podium, the subtle movements betraying a rare moment of internal calculation, and his eyes tracked her every gesture, noting the careful emphasis she placed on key points, the way she allowed pauses to let each concept resonate across the audience before proceeding. The audience, hundreds of executives and assistants, remained fully attentive, their bodies subtly leaning forward, eyes fixed, absorbing the clarity and thoroughness Jasmine projected, a collective awareness spreading that a moment of genuine insight was unfolding before them. The soft glow of chandeliers above reflected off polished surfaces, illuminating the faces of those present and highlighting the nuanced expressions of curiosity, respect, and surprise that marked the subtle transformation in perception. Jasmine allowed herself a brief, controlled pause, breathing slowly and letting the impact of her explanation settle across the room, the silence amplifying the importance of her points and underscoring the quiet authority she projected. Richard's eyes narrowed slightly, then softened as he processed the full weight of her observation, his posture shifting imperceptibly from surprise to contemplative recognition, the initial tension giving way to a cautious acknowledgement of her expertise. Every small detail, the light, the reflective surfaces, the slight movement of chairs, the quiet inhalations of the audience, worked together to highlight the significance of the moment, marking a pivot in perception where knowledge, preparation, and poise commanded attention and respect, bridging the divide between authority and insight in a manner that was both subtle and profound. Jasmine stood confidently, maintaining eye contact, her breathing steady, her hands poised, and her presence commanding without force, demonstrating that integrity and clarity could influence even the most controlled and authoritative environment, leaving an unmistakable imprint on the collective awareness of the room. Jasmine Carter's words had settled into the room like ripples across still water, each precise phrase illuminating the subtleties that had previously gone unnoticed, and for a moment, the space seemed to hold its collective breath, every individual processing the clarity and insight she had presented. Richard Whitman remained at the podium, his posture slightly more relaxed yet charged with contemplation, fingers brushing lightly against the edge as if grounding himself while his mind traced the implications of the correction and the unforeseen accuracy Jasmine had brought to the table. The soft glow of the chandeliers above caught in the polished surfaces of the conference room, creating subtle reflections on the marble floors and glossy wood of the podium, emphasizing the contrast between the calm authority of Jasmine and the sudden pause in Richard's previously unshakable rhythm. Around them, the audience of executives and assistants leaned forward imperceptibly, the gentle rustle of papers and quiet shuffle of notes forming a muted backdrop to the intensity of attention, each observer aware that they were witnessing a moment of expertise quietly reshaping perception and influence. Jasmine's breathing remained steady, her shoulders squared, and her gaze unwavering, projecting a quiet authority that demanded focus without raising volume, each deliberate pause allowing the weight of her observation to resonate fully across the room. Richard's eyes moved from her notebook to her face, registering the depth of preparation and understanding that had gone into every word. A subtle acknowledgment flickering in his expression as the realization of the correctness of her intervention settled in. The ambient sounds, the soft hum of ventilation, the occasional click of a pen, the slight shifting of chairs, accentuated the stillness and importance of the moment, highlighting the careful attention to detail that Jasmine had maintained throughout her explanation. She gestured slightly toward a specific section of her notes, drawing focus to a particular term whose clarification had prevented a potentially larger misunderstanding, the movement smooth and deliberate, reinforcing the precision of her insight. The sunlight filtering through the tall side windows shifted slowly across the room, creating fleeting highlights that illuminated the attentive expressions of the audience, capturing the mix of curiosity, surprise, and the dawning respect that had begun to spread. Jasmine allowed herself a subtle pause, letting the quiet settle and the significance of her words be fully absorbed, while Richard's posture shifted imperceptibly, a soft exhalation signaling the first conscious acknowledgment of her accuracy, his lips parting slightly as if to form a response, but holding in recognition of the impact of her clarity. Every detail, the reflections on surfaces, the shifting light, the faint ambient sounds, and the rapt attention of the audience, combined to create a tableau of realization, a moment where knowledge, composure, and preparation quietly asserted influence, reshaping authority in a way both subtle and profound. Jasmine remained poised, steady, and confident, allowing the quiet power of her competence to dominate the room without a single raised voice, demonstrating that clarity and insight could command respect and redefine perception even in the presence of immense experience and formal authority. Jasmine Carter noticed Richard Whitman's eyes soften for a brief instant, a subtle shift that betrayed the stirrings of reflection and self-questioning within him, as if the precise clarity of her words had prompted him to examine not only the content, but also the assumptions he had carried into the room. The quiet hum of the ventilation system filled the otherwise still air, a gentle counterpoint to the faint shuffle of papers and occasional scratch of a pen as colleagues absorbed the evolving dynamic, the polished surfaces of the conference room reflecting the warm glow from the chandeliers in elongated patterns across the marble floor. Jasmine's posture remained firm and poised, shoulders back and chin lifted slightly, her gaze unwavering as she observed the change in Richard's demeanor. The subtle interplay of respect and contemplation that replaced the initial surprise and tension. The soft light from the tall side windows created a gradient across the rows of chairs, illuminating the attentive faces of the audience and highlighting the way even the smallest gestures, slight nods, quiet inhalations, minute shifts in body language, spoke volumes about the recognition of her competence. Jasmine continued to articulate her points with calm authority, each word deliberate, carefully paced to allow for absorption and reflection, emphasizing the nuanced implications of the details she had corrected while maintaining a tone of measured professionalism that reinforced the credibility of her insight. Richard's hands flexed lightly against the podium as he considered her explanation, his mind tracing the contours of her reasoning and the foresight embedded in her observations. The faint tightening and releasing of his jaw, a subtle indicator of internal deliberation and emerging acknowledgment. The audience remained captivated, the collective focus sharpening as the significance of the moment settled across the room, the quiet attention amplifying the impact of Jasmine's clarity and the subtle demonstration of integrity that she embodied. The ambient sounds, the soft click of a notebook closing, the gentle shifting of a chair, the muted hum of distant conversation outside the room, served as a delicate underscore to the intensity of the exchange, accentuating the gravity of the moment without overwhelming the central interaction. Jasmine allowed a pause, letting the resonance of her words settle fully into the room, the silence working to reinforce the authority and insight she projected, creating space for comprehension and reflection. Richard's eyes returned to her. The initial rigidity of his posture softened into a contemplative stillness, a subtle exhale betraying the quiet acknowledgment of her accuracy, her preparation, and the integrity of her approach, the combination of which had prompted a rare and reflective internal response. Every element of the room, the interplay of light and shadow, the gentle background sounds, the attentive expressions of the audience, and the poised, deliberate presence of Jasmine, combined to form a tableau of quiet recognition, a moment in which careful preparation, insight, and unwavering composure reshaped perception and command, leaving a lasting impression of competence and integrity firmly established in the space. Jasmine Carter felt a subtle shift in the energy of the room as Richard Whitman leaned slightly back, a quiet acknowledgment flickering across his face, the composed mask he maintained for years, now softened by reflection and realization. The sunlight streaming through the tall windows cast long, warm lines across the polished marble floors, highlighting the crisp edges of Jasmine's notebook and the neat lines of her blazer, while the soft reflections from the chandeliers above danced gently across the attentive faces of the audience, who were leaning in, fully absorbed in the moment. Her hands rested lightly on the notebook, fingers brushing the edges as she spoke with calm authority, each word deliberate and measured, allowing the weight of her insight to resonate through the room without raising her voice. The subtle hum of the ventilation system, the faint scratch of a pen, and the muted shifting of papers provided a quiet background, emphasizing the stillness and intensity that had settled over the hall. Jasmine articulated the broader implications of her clarification, highlighting potential misunderstandings that had been avoided and underscoring the foresight in her observation, her voice carrying across the polished surfaces, crisp and precise, compelling attention without demanding it. Richard's eyes followed her carefully, his hands flexing lightly against the podium as he processed each point, the gentle tightening of his jaw and the soft exhale that escaped him signaling internal contemplation and emerging respect. The audience remained captivated, their attention fixed on the interaction, the subtle gestures of acknowledgment and quiet nods spreading across rows of executives as they absorbed the implications of Jasmine's intervention. The light shifted slowly, illuminating small details, the slight glimmer of her watch, the careful alignment of her notes, the focused expressions of her peers, creating a tableau of concentration and recognition that emphasized both clarity and poise. Jasmine allowed a controlled pause after a particularly critical point, letting the silence settle and reinforcing the authority and precision she projected, while Richard's posture shifted imperceptibly, the subtle easing of tension reflecting a growing acknowledgment of her capability. The ambient sounds, including the faint whir of the projector and the quiet shuffle of a chair leg, amplified the perception of a moment in which insight and composure quietly redefined the balance of attention and respect. Every detail, the light, the reflections, the attentive expressions, and Jasmine's poised presence, worked together to mark a subtle but powerful turning point, where careful preparation and unwavering clarity reshaped perception, and her quiet confidence left an undeniable impression, transforming the dynamic between authority and expertise with a clarity and impact that radiated. Throughout the room, Jasmine Carter stepped back from the podium, her notebook closed neatly in her hands, the crisp pages reflecting the warm light of the chandeliers above as she allowed herself a subtle, measured exhale. The room felt different now, transformed by the quiet authority she had projected. Every surface, every reflection on the polished marble floors, and the attentive expressions of the audience speaking to the subtle shift in perception. Richard Whitman remained at the podium, still processing the unexpected clarity of her intervention, his posture relaxed yet attentive, hands lightly resting as his gaze softened, a silent acknowledgment passing between them without a single word spoken. The hum of the ventilation system filled the quiet pauses, blending with the gentle shuffling of papers and the soft scratch of pens, underscoring the intensity and focus that had defined the preceding moments. Jasmine's presence exuded calm confidence, the deliberate precision of her words and gestures leaving an indelible impression on the audience, who now observed not just the content of her correction, but the composed authority with which she delivered it. Light from the side windows traced long, luminous lines across the floors and the rows of seated executives, highlighting the subtle movements, the slight nods of acknowledgment, and the soft inhalations that punctuated the attentive silence. Richard's eyes returned to her one final time, his expression a mixture of reflection and respect, lips parting slightly as he registered the full impact of her accuracy, the depth of her preparation, and the integrity behind every point she had made. The quiet attention of the room allowed the gravity of the moment to settle fully, a collective recognition spreading through the audience that competence and insight could command authority in ways that title and position alone could not. Jasmine adjusted her posture slightly, shoulders relaxed, chin lifted, and gaze steady, allowing the resonance of her presence to carry without further commentary, the subtle hum and soft ambient sounds accentuating the finality of the interaction. The polished podium reflected the warm light back into the room, capturing the tableau of focused faces, the careful arrangement of notes, and the poised figure of Jasmine, each element contributing to a sense of completion, of balance achieved through precision and composure. The gentle shifting of chairs, the quiet exhale of an assistant, and the faint flicker of sunlight through the tall windows reinforced the subtle power of the moment, illustrating that calm, deliberate clarity had irrevocably altered the dynamic within the room. Every reflection on the glass surfaces, every attentive gaze, every carefully measured gesture combined to create an enduring sense of resolution, a testament to the quiet authority of knowledge, integrity, and thoughtful preparation. Jasmine stood poised, composed, and serene, embodying the culmination of insight meeting opportunity, leaving an unmistakable impression on all who had witnessed the transformation of perception and the subtle but profound redefinition of influence in the space.